Eli leaned over her workbench, eyes narrowed behind a pair of magnifying lenses as she meticulously inspected the disassembled components of the Black Dawn rifle. Pieces of the weapon were spread across the lab in perfect order, each part labelled and tagged. She had spent hours tearing it down, analysing every mechanism, searching for weaknesses. Across from her, Aletheris watched in quiet interest, arms folded, his keen elven eyes flickering between the components. "You look like you're expecting this thing to whisper its secrets to you." Eli snorted. "If weapons could talk, this one would be screaming bad design choices. Look at this." She lifted a small crystalline core, holding it up to the dim lab light. The crystal, meant to be the rifle's primary energy source, was riddled with microscopic fractures. "There's your problem," she muttered. "This thing is defective." Aletheris stepped forward, tilting his head. "Explain." Eli set the crystal on a testing slab, pressing a rune-etched probe against its surface. Black Dawn's rifles are powered by enchanted energy crystals, right? The problem is, these things are unstable past 25 yards. The flaws inside the crystal cause minor energy refractions, meaning every shot lands in a slightly different place, even if the shooter's aim is perfect. That's why these rifles are inconsistent at long range. Aletheris studied the reading on the display. That would explain their poor accuracy beyond close combat. But why would they continue producing flawed crystals? Eli leaned back, rubbing her chin. Either they don't have the means to perfect the refinement process, or they don't care. Black Dawn fights like a blunt instrument. They prioritize volume over precision. Make 100 rifles that mostly work instead of 10 perfect ones. Aletheris nodded. A disposable army with disposable weapons. Eli smirked. "Exactly. And that means we can break them without ever having to fire a shot." She turned back to the rifle's internals, pulling another piece from the array. "And it gets worse. The firing mechanism? Cheaply made. Overheats if fired too quickly. I'd bet 10 rounds at rapid fire, and this thing locks up. The enchantments on the barrel? Poorly layered. If you overload the energy feed, you could cause a mana feedback loop, maybe even a backfire." Aletheris raised a brow. "So, it's a ticking time bomb in the wrong hands?" Eli grinned. "Exactly the kind of flaw we can exploit." She placed the crystal back onto the table, pulling out a new datapad and beginning to sketch modifications. "If we can pinpoint the right stress points, we could design an enchantment to accelerate the degradation of these crystals, force them to crack in combat." Aletheris considered this. He picked up the crystal, turning it over between his fingers, his gaze sharp with thought. "What if we take it a step further? Instead of just accelerating the degradation, what if we create a dampening field, something that disrupts these crystals in close range?" Eli looked up from her datapad, intrigued. "Like a localized pulse that overloads them?" Aletheris nodded. "Exactly. If we tune the frequency to the instability of the crystal lattice, we could make them fail on command. In the best-case scenario, they don't just crack, they overload and explode." Eli's grin widened. "Now that's a nasty little trick. A dampening field would mean that anywhere we are, their weapons become useless, if not outright dangerous to them." She immediately began sketching out calculations. It would have to be a contained disruption, too wide a field, and we risk interfering with our own gear. But if we keep the effect radius small, say 15, maybe 20 feet, that should be enough to render any Black Dawn rifle a liability. Aletheris tapped the crystal against the table, deep in thought. Then his gaze shifted to a grenade resting on the workbench, one of their enchanted prototypes. He picked it up, weighing it in his palm. "What if we make it throwable, like this grenade? Instead of a constant dampening field, we create a pulse grenade that disrupts their rifles on impact." Eli's eyes lit up as she caught on. "So instead of worrying about keeping the field away from our own gear, we just throw it into their ranks and let it do the work." Black Dawn's own rifles become the grenades. Aletheris nodded. Exactly. We stay outside the 25-meter range, and they take themselves out. Eli spun back to her workstation, already pulling together components. I can work with that. We enchant the grenade with a targeted resonance pulse, tuned to the fracture points in their rifle crystals. When it detonates, the pulse overloads every rifle in range, turning them into time bombs. Aletheris smirked. And just like that, their entire battlefield strategy collapses. Eli grinned. Oh, I like this. Let's get to work. After several hours of painstaking adjustments, recalibrations, and arguments over rune placement, Eli and Aletheris had their first prototype pulse grenade ready for testing. All right, moment of truth, Eli muttered, placing the grenade and a fractured black dawn crystal into the containment chamber. She stepped back and tapped the reinforced glass with her knuckle. This should be safe. Aletheris gave her a skeptical look. You sound very sure of that. Eli grinned as she flipped the activation rune on the remote trigger. What's the worst that could happen? The grenade detonated. The resulting explosion was far larger than anticipated. A blinding pulse of mana surged outward, sending a shockwave that blasted the containment room door clean off its hinges. The heavy metal door slammed against the opposite wall with a resounding clang, and overhead, alarms shrieked as the lab's fire suppression system kicked in, dousing everything in a fine mist of enchanted fog. Eli and Aletheris stood in stunned silence. From just outside the lab, Caleb, who had been working on the Wolfmobile, witnessed the entire thing. Slowly, he poked his head around the doorway, blinking at the wreckage before letting out a low whistle. You know, he mused, crossing his arms, for once, I can't even blame Darren for this. Eli wiped mist from her face, coughing. Okay, so maybe the pulse was a little too strong. Aletheris turned to her, his usually composed expression barely holding back amusement. A little? Caleb snorted. I'm pretty sure you just made a portable war crime. You gonna bottle that and sell it? Eli shot him a glare before turning back to Aletheris. All right, we tone it down, but admit it, it worked. Aletheris exhaled, nodding. That it did. Now let's make sure the next one doesn't blow up our own people. Caleb grinned. Yeah, 'cause I'd hate to explain to Gunnar that our own weapons are deadlier to us than the enemy's. Eli groaned. All right. Back to the drawing board. But at least now we know. This grenade is going to ruin Black Dawn's day. Eli shot him a smirk. Bingo! We're not just dismantling their weapons, we're turning them into their own worst enemy. She leaned forward, eyes gleaming as she got to work. Now she had a plan. Gunnar sat at his desk, a thick report spread out before him, but he wasn't reading it. His attention was split between Clara, who was seated across from him, and the growing headache forming behind his eyes. Meetings like this had become routine, strategizing, reallocating resources, planning their next move against Black Dawn. We need to reinforce our supply lines, Clara said, flipping through her notes. If Draven's consolidating forces, he might try cutting us off from our suppliers. We should... The entire building shook violently. The floor beneath them trembled, rattling their desks, shaking the light fixtures above. The sound of an explosion thundered through the halls, followed almost instantly by the shrieking wail of the fire alarms. Gunnar's coffee mug tipped over, spilling across his desk. For a split second, neither of them spoke. Then Gunnar shot to his feet, slamming his hands on the table. What the hell was that? Clara was already moving, pushing back from her chair as she reached for her sidearm. That was an explosion, inside the base. Gunnar stormed toward the door, his cybernetic fist clenched tight. If we're under attack again, I swear to God. But as soon as they reached the hallway, they weren't the only ones reacting. Bianca, Ashley, Desira, Jewel, and Evelyn were already converging from different corridors, weapons drawn, the wolves pacing alongside them, their hackles raised. Anyone got eyes on what the hell just happened? Gunnar barked, his blue eyes scanning the tense faces around him. Jewel tapped the comm unit in her ear, already working through their internal security feeds. No breaches, no intruders. But, You're going to want to see this. She gestured toward the nearest screen mounted on the wall. A live feed flickered to life, showing the lab. Or what used to be the lab. The blast doors were blown clean off their hinges, smoke and emergency mist still billowing from the ruined containment chamber. Inside, standing among the wreckage, were Eli and Aletheris, covered in soot and very much alive. And Caleb, standing in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the entire disaster unfold with an almost disappointed look. A heavy silence filled the hallway as everyone stared at the screen. Then Ashley sighed, lowering her rifle. All right. Who's killing them first? Evelyn shook her head. No, let Gunnar do it. I want to see the vein in his forehead pop. Clara, who had been tense and ready for a fight, simply exhaled. It's the lab. Of course it's the lab. Gunnar turned slowly, grinding his teeth. I am going to. Talk to them first before throwing anyone through a wall, Clara cut in, placing a hand on his shoulder. Let's at least let them explain before you murder them. Gunnar took a deep breath through his nose, nostrils flaring. Then, wordlessly, he turned and stormed toward the lab. Behind him, the rest of the team followed, some more amused than others. Caleb's voice crackled over the security feed as they walked. You know, for once, I can't even blame Derelith. By the time they reached the lab, the smoke was starting to clear, but the damage was undeniable. The blast doors were crumpled against the far wall, scorch marks seared into the surrounding stone. Emergency mist still clung to the air, the lab's fire suppression system struggling to compensate for whatever magical detonation had just occurred. Eli, still brushing soot off her sleeves, froze mid-motion when she spotted Gunnar marching in like an incoming storm. Aletheris, to his credit, kept his composure, though he was notably keeping himself positioned just slightly behind Eli. Caleb leaned against the wall, watching it all unfold like he was front row to a theatre performance. Gunnar didn't stop walking until he was standing directly in front of Eli. His blue eye burned with barely restrained fury. Explain, now. Eli, ever the professional, cleared her throat and straightened. So, good news. The grenade works. Gunnar's cybernetic fist clenched. And the bad news? Eli winced. The blast radius was a little more than expected. But that just means we need to tweak the enchantments. You blew the damn doors off my lab, Eli. Gunnar's voice was dangerously low. After we just got attacked. Do you have any idea what I was thinking when this entire building shook? Aletheris decided it was safer to contribute. In our defense, the experiment was completely contained. In theory. Clara exhaled, rubbing her temple. In theory? Ashley folded her arms. So, do we even need to fight Black Dawn at this point, or are we just planning to nuke them with Eli's failed experiments? Eli threw up her hands. It wasn't a failure. It was just a little over-enthusiastic. Like Darren at an open bar, Caleb added helpfully. Gunnar inhaled sharply, forcing himself to regain control. He turned to Eli, pointing at her chest. You're going to fix this, and before you run another test, I want a full report on how you're containing the next one. I do not need our own weapons taking us out before the fight even starts. Eli nodded quickly. Absolutely. Full containment, full safety measures. No more surprises. Gunnar took another long, steady breath. All right. Everyone clear out. Eli, Aletheris, you clean this up. Caleb, he pointed at him. Stop enjoying this so much. Caleb grinned, making a small zipping motion over his lips, but his eyes were still gleaming with amusement. As the team dispersed, Eli turned back to Aletheris, exhaling. Well, that could have gone worse. Aletheris arched a brow. He didn't throw you through a wall. That's about as good as you could have hoped for. Eli smirked. All right. Let's make a version that doesn't level the damn building. Aletheris, still holding one of the remaining grenades, examined it thoughtfully. What if we make it adjustable? Eli frowned. Adjustable? He nodded, flipping the grenade between his fingers. Think about it. There may be times we want a bigger explosion, like taking down a structure, hitting a heavy weapons emplacement, or clearing a battlefield. If we build in a tunable enchantment, the user could select the intensity before throwing it. Eli considered that, then a slow grin spread across her face. A grenade with a dial. Low setting for a nice contained disruption. High setting for, well, what we just did. Aletheris smirked. Exactly. Just, with a warning label this time. Eli clapped her hands together. All right, back to the workbench. We need to refine this thing. Smaller, more efficient, and definitely grenade-sized. Aletheris nodded, already reaching for tools. Less of a portable catastrophe, more of a precision magical EMP grenade. Eli grinned as she pulled up the schematics, making adjustments. Let's get to work, and this time, let's try not to blow up the damn lab again. Gunnar stood in his office, arms crossed, staring at the live tactical map spread across the table. The tension in the room was thick, the fallout from the recent attack still fresh, the explosion in the lab just another headache stacked onto an already impossible situation. Clara stood beside him, arms folded, watching his expression carefully. Before either of them could speak, the door swung open. Darren stepped inside first, his usual smirk in place, but there was an edge to it. A second later, Rose followed, her face unreadable as she shut the door behind her. Took you too long enough, Gunnar grumbled, straightening. Tell me you've got something worth my time. Darren snorted, leaning against the back of a chair. Oh, don't worry, boss. Rose here. She found something big. Gunnar's gaze snapped to Rose. Well. Rose held his stare, her voice measured, controlled. I found a way into Draven's network. Clara shifted slightly, eyes narrowing. How? Rose reached into her coat, pulling out a small, enchanted crystal, the flame heart fused with the portal crystal. It flickered in the dim light, the power within barely contained. This, she said, placing it on the table, I used it to repair the portal in Alfheim. And in doing so, I found an old, forgotten link, one Draven hasn't touched since the fall of Eldermire. A portal he thought was buried. Gunnar frowned. What portal? She took a slow breath. A hidden one beneath Eldermire. When I was working under Draven, he took me to a lower level, a place warded so heavily that no magic could penetrate it. I never thought much of it before, but he was experimenting on a separate portal down there, and it's still active. Darren grinned. And, since it's from before Draven took full control of the network, it means we have a way in, a blind spot he didn't account for. Gunnar's expression hardened. And you're sure this is still operational? Rose nodded. I traced it. The link is there. It hasn't been accessed in over 100 years. No security measures, no defenses. It's like he forgot about it. Clara exhaled. Or it's a trap. Rose met her gaze. I thought of that too. Which is why I didn't open it. Gunnar studied her for a long moment, then exhaled, rubbing his temple. All right. If this is legit, it's the best lead we've got, but we don't go in blind. We prep a team. We analyze everything before making a move. Darren grinned, nudging Rose. Told you he'd say that. Rose rolled her eyes. I already locked the portal's connection. It's not going anywhere. We move when we're ready. Gunnar nodded, his voice firm. Good. Because if we're doing this, we do it on our terms. No mistakes. The war room was tense with quiet urgency as the key players of the pack gathered around the large central table, the weight of the mission pressing down on them. The holographic projection of Eldermire's ruins flickered in the air above them, a grim reminder of the city's destruction at Draven's hands. Gunnar stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, his gaze sharp as he scanned the room while the last of the team filtered in, the wolves restless in the background, Clara, Eli, Darren, Ashley, Desira, Bianca, Jewel, Evelyn, Aletheris, Shade, and Katrina, all ready for whatever came next. The wolves paced in the background, ever watchful. All right, listen up, Gunnar began, his voice sharp. Rose found us a way into Draven's network, a forgotten portal beneath Eldermire. Problem is, it's buried under tons of rubble. No clear way out. He nodded to Rose, his voice firm. You're up. Walk us through it. Rose stepped forward, her expression unreadable as she activated a holographic projection of Eldermire's ruins, the glowing display flickering to life above the table. The projection zoomed in on a collapsed underground chamber, hidden beneath layers of stone and twisted metal. This is where the portal is located, she said, pointing to the center of the ruins. Draven fought his father here. The entire structure collapsed when the city fell. The portal itself is still intact. I traced its signature. We'll have to dig our way out. Darren leaned forward, arms resting on the table. Let me guess, we have to do this without making a damn sound. Rose nodded. If we make too much noise, Draven's forces will know we're there. And if the wrong structure collapses while we're digging, we're dead. A silence settled over the group before Gunnar exhaled sharply. All right, that means we need ideas. Quiet ways to clear a path, safe ways to extract, and contingency plans if things go sideways. He swept his gaze across the table. So, who's got suggestions? Eli adjusted the strap on her wrist, then spoke up. Before we send anyone through, we should send a drone first. If the portal chamber is unstable, or if there are any surprises waiting for us, it's better to find out before we step into a death trap. Rose nodded. Good call. I can adjust the portal's frequency to allow for a controlled signal relay, so the drone doesn't lose connection once it's through. That way, we'll get a real-time feed of what's inside. Gunnar considered this, then nodded. Fine. We test it first. If the chamber is clear and the portal is stable, we move in. If it's compromised, we rethink our approach. Darren smirked. Finally, a good use for Eli's expensive toys. Darren leaned back in his chair, tapping a finger against the table. We portal directly into the underground chamber. That gets us in without disturbing the rubble up top. Once we're there, we start digging toward the surface, but we don't break through completely until we're ready. Eli nodded, arms crossed. I can enchant the walls and supports as we excavate to keep the structure from caving in. Aletheris and I can work together to reinforce weak points and make sure the tunnel is stable. Shade glanced at Darren. Your 5077th Engineering Battalion is stationed in the region, right? If we need equipment, they'd have it. Darren smirked. Damn right they do. I can have them on standby with excavation gear. No explosives, nothing loud, but they can help clear the path once we're close. Clara nodded. So, we dig carefully from the chamber, reinforcing as we go. When we're almost through, we stop, check our surroundings, and only break through when we're certain it's safe. Gunnar folded his arms, nodding. All right. This gives us control over the situation. We stay ahead of Draven and avoid unnecessary risks. We're not rushing in blind. We move in quiet, dig our way out under controlled conditions, and keep reinforcements ready in case things go south. He looked around the room, letting the silence settle as he met each of their gazes. No objections? Good. Gear up. We move soon. An hour later, the select team assembled in the portal chamber. Rose, Clara, Eli, Shade, and Katrina. Darren had split off to coordinate with the 5077th Engineering Battalion, ensuring they had the equipment and manpower ready for extraction once the path was cleared. The rest of the team remained on standby, waiting for confirmation before full-scale operations could begin. Rose stepped forward and placed the Flameheart portal crystal into the console. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the runes on the gateway flared to life, pulsing with energy as the portal system rebooted. The swirling vortex remained dim, waiting for full stabilization. Eli stood nearby, setting up the drone. All right, the signal relay is ready. Once you open the portal, I'll send the drone through first. If the chamber's unstable, we'll know before anyone steps in. Clara adjusted the strap on her gear. Let's just hope we're not stepping into a collapsed tomb. Shade crossed his arms. Or worse, a void space. If too much debris has crushed the chamber, We might be looking at a collapsed gateway, which means recalibrating the exit point. Rose exhaled, focusing as the console interface flickered online. She began calibrating the power flow, ensuring the portal stabilized before activation. All right, let's bring it online. The portal flared to life, swirling with energy. The faint, shadowed outline of the underground chamber appeared within the shimmering vortex. Eli activated the drone. Sending it through now. Let's see what we're dealing with. The drone whirred to life, its small reinforced frame hovering forward before vanishing through the shimmering portal. The team watched in tense silence as Eli monitored the live feed on her tablet, the display flickering with static before resolving into a clear image. The chamber was massive, larger than expected. Despite the collapse of Eldermire above, this underground space remained intact, a vast stone hall, lined with ancient carvings and towering support pillars that still held strong. Dust drifted in the air, but there were no signs of immediate danger. Eli scanned the data. Structural integrity looks solid. No cave-ins, no visible threats. The drone's camera panned toward the far end of the chamber, revealing two massive sealed doors, untouched by time, their engravings still gleaming faintly in the dim light. "We've got something," Eli murmured, adjusting the zoom. Doors at the far end, sealed. No immediate threats in sight. The chamber is safe to enter. Katrina exhaled, rolling her shoulders. "All right, we're up." Gunner's voice crackled over the comms. "Move in! Stay sharp!" Without hesitation, Katrina, Eli, and Shade stepped through the portal, their forms vanishing into the swirling light as they entered the underground chamber. The trio landed smoothly on the solid stone floor, their footsteps echoing faintly in the vast, open space. Eli quickly unhooked a compact light set from her pack and set it up, casting a pale glow across the chamber. Shadows stretched along the carved walls, revealing the intricate details of the ancient architecture. Eli swept her scanner across the area. Still no signs of movement or energy fluctuations, no hidden traps or residual magic. So far, this place is as dead as it looks. Shade, already moving toward the massive doors, ran his gloved hands along the surface. The engravings were deep, the stone cool to the touch. He gave the door a slight push, testing the weight. A low, creaking groan filled the chamber as the door shifted slightly beneath his hand. Dust trickled from the edges, but it didn't resist. Shade braced himself, pushing harder, and the ancient doorway swung open, revealing a dark passage beyond. He turned back to the others, nodding. "It's open. The other side is intact." Eli adjusted the drone's settings. "Let's not go rushing in blind just yet. Sending the drone through again. Let's see what's beyond this passage." The drone hovered forward, its small lights cutting through the darkness as it moved deeper into the revealed corridor. The feed displayed a series of connected rooms, each appearing untouched by time. Old crates and storage containers lined some of the walls, their surfaces coated in thick layers of dust. Eli studied the readings. No signs of life, no residual energy signatures. Whatever this place was, it's been sealed off for a long time. Shade's brow furrowed. "What's in those crates? Supplies? Artifacts?" Katrina shifted slightly, watching the feed. "Could be anything. Weapons, documents, or just abandoned junk. We won't know until we get a closer look." The drone continued forward, reaching another set of doors at the far end of the corridor. Unlike the first, these doors were heavier, their hinges reinforced. Shade stepped up to the real version, running a hand over the surface before cautiously testing them. The moment he applied pressure, a deep metallic groan echoed through the chamber. Dust trickled down from above as the doors slowly creaked open, revealing what lay beyond. A collapsed stairwell. Shade muttered a curse. "Well, that's not ideal." Eli frowned at the drone's display. "Stairs are completely destroyed. Looks like they led up to another level. Maybe an old exit point. But from this, we're going nowhere." Katrina sighed. "So much for an easy way out." Shade turned back to the others. All right, let's check those crates. If there's anything useful here, now's the time to find out. Katrina nodded and moved toward the nearest stack, brushing away a thick layer of dust before prying open the lid. Inside, she found old supplies, dried out rations, aged parchment, and rusted tools. She picked up a metallic piece, examining its worn engraving. Looks like remnants of whoever used this place before, nothing immediately useful. Shade cracked open another crate, revealing metal components, possibly old weapon parts or machinery. He ran a gloved hand over the pieces, frowning. Some of this might still be salvageable, but it's ancient. Meanwhile, Eli straightened. I'm heading back to Alfheim to check in with Gunnar. If we're going to work on clearing a way out, we need to coordinate with the rest of the team. Shade glanced at her. You sure you don't want to stick around and see if we uncover some lost treasure? Eli smirked. I trust you to hoard all the junk without me. Keep your comms open, I'll be back soon. She stepped toward the portal, activating her interface before vanishing into the shimmering vortex, leaving Katrina and Shade to continue their search.